How can businesses thrive by aligning their strategies with environmental conservation? Today, we'll turn to a uniquely qualified expert who works with companies to answer just this question. Stephanie Cardenas is Audit and Assurance Senior Manager at Deloitte, who, after growing up in Ecuador and working in the Galapagos Islands, has developed a keen awareness of nature's diverse ecosystems and brings that perspective to help companies adopt a nature-positive approach. Stay tuned. Stephanie will join us from New York in a moment. Inside ESG is a timely new production which takes you inside the work of practitioners on the ground, chief risk officers, market analysts, cybersecurity experts, and founders of game-changing startups. We'll talk with specialists in every corner of the globe, across industries and issues, dropping into Argentina to hear about lithium mining, Central Asia for a view of China's Belt and Road Initiative, and West Africa for a perspective on climate risk, among other stops. Welcome, Stephanie. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Hi, Maureen. Happy to be here.
Your career has significantly centered on putting nature and biodiversity loss on the business agenda. Can you share why it's crucial for businesses to prioritize these issues?
Absolutely. I mean, my role here at Deloitte really focuses on advising companies on ways they could measure, manage, and track their nature-related impacts, risk, dependencies, and opportunities. And growing up in a country like Ecuador and having worked in the Galapagos Islands and being exposed to all these different ecosystem, microclimate, insects, animals, landscapes, has really been key for my love for nature. And now, kind of working in this space with companies, thinking through what are the materials that they need to create the products that our society needs, right? Like one key one would be food, energy is another one, any materials for kind of like the built environment, thinking how they come from nature. So, really recognizing nature hasn't been accounted for in the longest time. And we really need to start accounting for nature because we're seeing that there's biodiversity loss, nature loss, and we really need to think through how to help this to thrive.
Now, with reports suggesting that a nature positive strategy could create nearly 395 million jobs by 2030 and significantly boost global GDP, could you first explain what the term nature positive means and tell us what steps you advise companies to take to align their operations with the framework?
Yes. So there was this nature positive initiative created in 2023. This whole consortium of, I would say, the biggest and most important NGOs working in this space. And the concept that they brought was nature positive is to halt and reverse nature loss by 2030, which is a very important mark with a baseline of 2020, and then achieving full recovery by 2050, which is also in line with what the global biodiversity framework is looking for, which is really being in harmony with nature and living in harmony with nature. Why do I mention this? Because there will be, similar to the climate COP, let's call it a nature COP this year at the end of October, and which is COP 16. And these goals will be measured and looked into, kind of taking stock.
So, given the daunting statistics, such as the loss of 32% of the world's forest and over 85% of wetlands, what are some practical strategies businesses can adopt to mitigate these impacts? And how does your team at Deloitte help companies navigate these challenges?
Well, I think also just to mention what you asked before, all these frameworks, right? What do we do and why this is all happening? Starting from 2 years ago, COP15 happened, the Global Biodiversity Framework, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework was signed by over 196 countries. And this kind of catalyzed everything happening now. One, from that regulatory perspective, that is CSRD, which is that Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive by the EU. which includes topics that are environmental, but focus broader than climate. So that means water, biodiversity and ecosystems, circular economy, and freshwater and oceans. So it's really important to see that this is being accounted from a regulatory lens. And then you also have the Task Force for Nature-related Financial Disclosures, which it is a global initiative that guides financial and business decisions to favor nature positive outcomes. And all this being consistent of how we work with clients, really looking into, first of all, assess, right? Like assess where your major risk would be, assess where your interactions with nature are, what impacts are you having, how much do you depend on a certain natural resource and a certain ecosystem service. So you can really focus your efforts there and create that resiliency for your business.
Right. It's very valuable, of course. And on the topic of valuing nature, Deloitte's Chairperson's Guide suggests that companies begin by reflecting on their connection with nature. How do you facilitate this kind of strategic reflection among the executives and boards you advise?
Well, I think it all starts by really understanding what this means. So, really, that value of nature to business, as I said, it hasn't been accounted for. We use nature every day. We breathe, we drink water. We depend on forest and land, forest to even regulate our climate. As you know, trees are so important, but yet all economic output is so reliant on nature and we're not accounting for it. And now, when there are natural disasters, this is when this alarm is hitting kind of organizations into, oh my God, there's a drought. What can I do? Our crops are impacted. How could we prevent this? How can we mitigate this? So that's why really understanding. Maybe the other thing to mention is that nature is very localized problem. So even if you're a global company, you cannot think the same solutions in the US from droughts in Brazil, right? Or from rains in Brazil. They're very different. Even how you could respond, how governments can respond, how stakeholders are responding to this. So again, very localized. I would say that's why first of all understanding, then really taking stock into what are the issues and identify those overlaps or opportunities and risk that come with this. Identify next steps, right? What is the roadmap? Create a plan, talk to local stakeholders as well, to your local teams, but with that global mindset because this is also a systems problem. So, how can you solve and contribute as an organization towards this? My best advice would be the LEAP framework as well to apply this. This LEAP framework is a risk assessment framework that helps companies, and it comes from the TNFD that I mentioned before. And it does start with locate, evaluate, assess, and report progress. So it is a really step-by-step approach of how companies can apply this. Why this framework? This framework has also been embedded as suggested in CSRD, so in other regulations. And not only that, but it creates that interoperability when you're looking into GRI, as I said, CSRD, CDP will also be adopting TNFD recommendations starting this year. So then you can also create efficiencies when looking at this problem.
And that's so important, the efficiencies, because as you probably know better than most, it's overwhelming for companies that are engaging in any kind of ESG reporting to have to deal with more and more frameworks. So now moving to the financial sector, it's evident that U.S. banks have significant exposure to sectors dependent on nature, with substantial risks to their loan portfolios. In your view, how can financial institutions better support biodiversity and achieve nature positive outcomes?
Well, I think banks are essential, and in general, financial institutions are essential to solving the problem. First of all, they know how to value things, so they would be prepared for this mindset of how to value nature. Now, accounting what their financial flows are actually doing within their portfolios is important to also help guide and ask for more accountability from their clients, right? So I think that would be important. Now, from an opportunity standpoint, because what I mentioned was more from that risk standpoint, from an opportunity standpoint, there's a market growth happening, there are investments happening, there's a market built for biodiversity credits. So this could really create an opportunity for bringing that financial positive, I would say nature positive outcomes to our world. And then the other thing is that banks do have guidance, a lot of guidance out there for them to follow when it comes to measuring and managing and looking into their risk, impacts, and opportunities and dependencies. So I would say look at the guidance. US banks, we did do a study in which I supported our team, and we did see that US banks were a bit behind towards compared to their European counterparts. I don't think this is a surprise, but we're also seeing an uptick in the US market regarding nature related services.
Thank you for mentioning the opportunity aspect of this, because I think, many of us who think about profitability and streamlining operations worry most about risk. But there is opportunity here. So now, before we conclude, Stephanie, can you discuss the importance of stakeholder communication in ESG initiatives? How can companies effectively engage their stakeholders in dialogues about their environmental strategies and achievements?
I think it's more important than ever to be interacting with your stakeholders. There's so much information out there that you want to really communicate to your stakeholders your perspective, your values, what you're working on, what you're doing. If it's an investor, they would like to know both from a risk and opportunity standpoint. If it's a community, it might be from that social license to operate. If it looks into the environment, again, it goes to the community and even your own workforce that you can be impacting by your operations. And it could be positive and negative impacts, right? But I think that dependency of nature and being able to communicate is important. We're also seeing part of like a retention factor, right? Companies that are more invested on ESG or sustainability topics, probably for millennial and Gen Zs, can see higher grades of retention. At Deloitte, we are seeing people interested in all our nature-related services and asking about them. And I believe that has to do with nature being very, very tangible. I know that Deloitte's latest sustainability action report found that integrating ESG within a company strategy can have tangible business benefits, and 51% of the executives surveyed said they anticipated stronger stakeholder trust. So I think this is more important than polarizing. It's really communicating and being able to connect with all these stakeholders.
Right. And the point you made about competing in the labor market with this type of strategy, I think will resonate very much with companies in many sectors around the world. So I just want to say, Stephanie, thank you very much for joining us today. And I look forward to following your work on the business side of nature and biodiversity.
Thank you, Maureen, for the invite. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks for joining us today. To make sure you don't miss out on our next episode, subscribe to the Inside ESG podcast on Spotify or any podcast platform, the YouTube channel, the LinkedIn newsletter, and our mailing list on InsideESG.com. See you next time.